The night before I found out, I made my husband's favorite dinner. Chicken masala, the real kind, with actual masala wine and mushrooms I'd slice by hand after a 10-hour workday. I remember being proud of that. I remember thinking, this is what a good life looks like. 2 people, a small kitchen, something warm on the stove. I didn't know yet that the call I'd gotten 3 weeks earlier, the one where my mother said, "Your father and I have been thinking," in that particular tone she used when a decision had already been made, was the beginning of something I couldn't unthink. My name is Adrienne. I'm 32. I'm a physical therapist at an outpatient clinic in Raleigh, North Carolina. I spend my days helping people rebuild what was broken, torn ACLs, frozen shoulders, the slow grief of a body that stopped cooperating. I'm good at it because I know how to hold steady when something hurts. I learned that early. My husband, Marcus, is an accountant, the detail-oriented kind, the kind who notices when a number is off by $4 and can't let it go until he finds the discrepancy. When we were dating, I used to tease him about it. He'd say, "Numbers don't lie, Adrienne, people do." I'd roll my eyes. I stopped doing that about 2 years ago. My brother is 28. He goes by his middle name, Luca, always has, because he decided at age 9 that his first name, Gregory, was boring, and our parents let him rename himself because that's the kind of thing they did for him. Luca is the kind of person who fills a room without trying. Charming, funny. The guy at every party who somehow knows everyone. He sells software for a startup downtown and has been about to close a huge deal for approximately 4 years. Growing up, I was the responsible one. The one who made lists, followed through, showed up. Luca was the one with potential. The distinction felt neutral when we were children. By the time I turned 30, I understood it for what it was. I was the lamp in the corner, and Luca was the chandelier everyone kept adjusting the dimmer switch for. My maternal grandfather passed away when I was 23. He was a quiet man, a retired electrician from Greensboro, and he loved me in the uncomplicated way that some grandparents do, without conditions, without performance reviews. After he died, there was an estate meeting I wasn't invited to attend. My mother mentioned afterward, almost in passing, that Grandpa Walt had set up a fund for me. For something big, she said. A house, a wedding, something like that. We're managing it for you. She said it the way you'd say the leftovers are in the fridge, like it was already taken care of, no need to look further. I didn't ask for statements. I didn't ask for the account number. In my family, asking for documentation meant you didn't trust people, and not trusting people was the same as being ungrateful, and being ungrateful was the worst thing you could be. So I nodded and went back to my life and filed it in the part of my brain labeled someday. Marcus and I got engaged in October. We'd been together 4 years, and when he proposed on the back porch of the house we were renting with the string lights we'd hung ourselves the previous summer and a ring he'd picked out entirely alone because he knew my taste better than I did, I cried in a way I hadn't since I was a kid. Loud, ugly, relieved crying, like something I'd been hoarding could finally put itself down. We chose a venue quickly, a restored farmhouse outside of Chapel Hill with exposed beams and a wraparound porch and a field that turned golden in late afternoon light. The date we locked in was September 13th, 14 months out. We signed the contract, paid a non-refundable deposit, and sent save the dates before the leaves had even finished falling. My mother cried when I told her. Happy tears, or what I took for happy tears. My father said, finally, and then hugged me, which for him was practically a standing ovation. Even Luca texted a string of emojis that included a champagne bottle and what appeared to be a disco ball. Things felt, briefly, like they were going to be fine. They stayed fine for about 4 months. The call came on a Thursday evening in February. I was grading patient progress notes at the kitchen table when my mother's name lit up my screen. I answered on the second ring. Her voice was light, conversational, the kind of tone she used when she wanted something to sound smaller than it was. She asked about my week, about Marcus, about whether we'd decided on a caterer yet. Then she said, "Oh, I wanted to mention something about Luca." I waited. "He's going to Italy." I said, "Okay." A whole trip. Rome, Florence, the Amalfi Coast. 10 days. He's been planning it forever and he finally found the right group to go with. She paused. It's September. Something in my chest went still. Mom, I said, September 13th is our wedding. I know, but he booked it months ago, Addie, before he realized. She said before he realized, the way you'd say before the storm hit, like it was weather, like no one was responsible. The group booking is non-refundable. Everyone else already paid. He'd lose thousands. I stared at my reflection in the dark kitchen window. We can't change the date, I said. The contract is signed. The deposit is gone. We have 140 guests who've already booked flights. Well, she said, and the warmth in her voice cooled exactly 1 degree. He didn't plan this to be difficult. I know he didn't. Maybe you could talk to the venue, see if there's flexibility. There isn't. A pause, the kind that wasn't empty. Adrienne, he's your brother. I know, I thought. I know who he is. I've known my whole life. I'm not moving the wedding, I said. She sighed, long and meaning it. Let me talk to your father. My father called 2 days later, Sunday morning, while I was still in my pajamas drinking coffee and reading. He didn't start with hello. Your mother told me about the situation, he said, as if they were two equally weighted sides and I happened to be one of them. It's not a situation, Dad. It's our wedding. We set the date over a year ago. Luca made a financial commitment. So did we, 14 months ago. It's not the same, he said, and something in his voice suggested he wasn't interested in debating the arithmetic. You're the older one. You've always been more grounded. We need you to be flexible. I pressed my fingertips against my mug. I have been flexible my entire life. This is family. My wedding is family. He let out a breath, the kind that meant he was done reasoning. If you won't consider it, he said slowly, then maybe we won't be there. The mug was warm under my hands. I focused on that. Excuse me. If you're going to be this rigid, maybe your brother and us will do something together that week. And you can have your wedding without us. I waited. I thought he might soften it. He didn't. Okay, I said, and I hung up. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after that. I didn't cry. I'd learned young that crying in my family was treated as evidence. You were being dramatic. And the habit had stuck so hard, I sometimes couldn't cry even when I needed to. I just sat, very still, the way I always did when something was breaking inside me and I needed to keep it invisible. When Marcus came home, I told him everything. He sat across from me and listened without interrupting, his elbows on the table, his expression getting quieter the longer I talked. When I finished, he didn't say I told you so, even though he had, privately, told me so. Years ago, about Luca, about the way my parents operated. He just said, Luca is going to Italy in September. That's what she said. That's expensive. He's always figuring it out. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Do you know what happened with your grandfather's fund? I looked at him. You mentioned it once, back when we first got engaged. You said your parents were managing it. He paused. Have you ever seen a statement? I hadn't. I said so. Do you know what institution it's held at? I didn't know that either. He nodded slowly, the way he nodded when he was solving something in his head. Okay, he said. Not okay, this is fine. Just okay, I'm starting somewhere. Over the next 3 weeks, Marcus moved quietly. He didn't tell my parents he was looking. He didn't tell me everything he was doing in real time because he knew that uncertainty might make me call them and warn them, and he didn't want that. Later, he showed me the list. He pulled the public probate records from Guilford County, where my grandfather had lived. He'd located the estate filing, which named a trustee. He'd compared that name against corporate records. He'd made a few phone calls, calm and professional, the way he did everything. One evening, I came home from a late shift, and he was at the dining room table with his laptop and a yellow legal pad covered in notes. Sit down, he said, not urgently, like he was about to show me a spreadsheet that was going to change the way I understood something. I sat. He turned the laptop toward me. It was a bank record, not hacked, not stolen, obtained through the legal process available to beneficiaries once Marcus had established via the probate records that the fund had been structured in my name. The number at the top made my vision blur slightly. $54,000. Transferred out. 9 months before our wedding date. Recipient, an LLC registered in Luca's name. Memo line, investment advance. I stared at it long enough that the numbers stopped looking like numbers. That's my money, I said. I didn't say it dramatically. I said it the way you'd say that's my coat when someone else is wearing it, matter of fact, slightly uncomprehending. It was structured as a beneficiary trust, Marcus said, specifically for you. For a major life milestone. The trustee had discretion, but not unlimited discretion, and your parents were listed as co-trustees, which is how they accessed it. He paused. There's no repayment record, no promissory note, no indication Luca has paid anything back. I pressed my palms flat against the table. They gave it to him. Marcus's jaw was tight. They gave it to him. I thought about Grandpa Walt, his hands, the smell of his workshop, sawdust and WD-40. The way he'd pressed a card into my hand at my college graduation that said, in his blunt, no-wasted words way, you worked for this. Keep working. I'm proud. I thought about the fact that he'd saved money his whole life and had designated it for me specifically, for something real, and that someone had looked at that and seen an opportunity. There's one more thing, Marcus said. He turned the laptop back, typed something, turned it again. A text thread, forwarded to him from a cousin of mine who'd seen something on a family group chat before it was deleted. Luca had messaged our parents months earlier. Hey, if Adrienne asks about the fun thing, just say it's still being managed. She won't push. I read it 3 times. He knew it was mine. He knew what it was meant for. And he'd counted on me being exactly who I had always been, the one who wouldn't push, the one who took the answer she was given and filed it under someday and went back to making dinner. The next week, I asked Luca to meet me. I picked a coffee shop in Durham, neutral territory, a place with high ceilings and enough ambient noise that we couldn't make a scene. He showed up 7 minutes late, in a jacket I didn't recognize, ordered something elaborate, and sat across from me with the relaxed confidence of someone who had no idea what was coming. What's up? He said. He was half looking at his phone. I waited until he put it down. I want to talk about Grandpa Walt's fund. He blinked. Something moved across his face, not guilt exactly, more like recalibration. He set his cup down. Where is this coming from? Answer the question, Luca. It's a family financial thing, he said. Mom and Dad handle it. It's in my name. He leaned back slightly. Look, there were some decisions made. It's complicated. There were tax reasons. $54,000, I said. His mouth closed. Transferred to your LLC 9 months ago. I've seen the bank record. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I was going to pay it back. From Italy? His eyes went flat. That's not fair. Was it fair to take money that was left for my wedding? You have a job, he said, and I recognized the sentence immediately, the same logic my father had always used to explain why my needs were more optional than Luca's. You're fine. You don't need it as much. You and Marcus are doing well. I had an opportunity. It wasn't going to be there forever. It wasn't yours. He looked past me, out the window, the way people do when they're deciding which exit to take. Then he looked back. Are you going to make this a whole thing? I looked at him for a long moment. I'm going to get my money back, I said. That's not a threat. It's just what's happening. He didn't say anything. He picked up his coffee. I picked up my bag and walked out into the bright September air, except it was still March and nothing was bright yet, but something had shifted in me. Something that had been soft for a long time had gone firm. Marcus had already found a lawyer. A good one. Someone who specialized in trust and estate disputes, operated out of a mid-rise in downtown Raleigh, and had the particular energy of a person who had seen this exact thing happen 100 times and found it personally offensive each time. She reviewed everything we brought her and said, without theater, "This is straightforward. You have standing, you have documentation, and the transfer was improper given the trust's stated purpose." She drafted a demand letter. We didn't tell my parents it was coming. The weeks between that conversation and the wedding were strange. My parents were polite in the way that people are polite when they're performing normalcy. Brief texts, no calls, a card my mother sent about the shower that she'd been invited to but declined to attend. My father didn't reach out at all. The morning of September 13th arrived cloudless and warm. The kind of early fall day that feels like a gift from a season that isn't quite ready to leave. The farmhouse was everything we'd imagined. The field behind it had turned gold. String lights hung in the old oak tree near the ceremony arch. 140 people filled the white chairs and found their seats and adjusted their sunglasses in the slanted afternoon light. My parents came. I hadn't known they would. My mother had texted 4 days earlier, "We'll be there. Family is family." My father hadn't texted at all, which I took to mean the same thing. They sat in the front row. My mother in a silk dress I'd never seen. My father in a tie. He only wore to funerals and weddings, looking like a man who had decided to interpret showing up as the whole of what was required of him. The ceremony was honest and simple, and exactly what Marcus and I had wanted. Vows we'd written ourselves, a reading from a friend who'd known us since before we knew each other. The minister who'd known Marcus's family for 20 years. When Marcus took my hands at the altar, his grip was steady and certain. The same grip he'd had when he sat across from me at our kitchen table and said, "I found it." I looked at him and I thought, this is the person who went looking. This is the person who showed me what I hadn't let myself see. We said, "I do." We kissed. 140 people stood up and clapped, and somewhere in the front row my parents clapped too, and I made myself not look. At the reception, the band played, and dinner was served, and people moved through their joy with the ease of guests who traveled distances and wanted the distance to have been worth it. Cousins I hadn't seen in years. Friends from graduate school, Marcus's family, warm and large and unguarded in the way I'd always privately envied. I thought briefly that we might get through the evening without incident. Then my mother found me near the bar during cocktail hour. She touched my arm and leaned close and said in a voice like warm gravel, "Maybe we can move past all of this now, start fresh. Tonight doesn't need to be about any of that." That, she said, like what had been taken from me was a weather event, something that had happened rather than something that had been done. I looked at her for a moment. Her earrings were gold. Her expression was hopeful in a specific, managed way. The way people are hopeful when they believe forgiveness is something you can request on a timeline of your choosing. "We sent a demand letter," I said, "on Monday." Her face changed. "Our lawyer sent it to yours," I said. "You'll need to respond within 30 days. She opened her mouth. "Not tonight, Mom." I picked up my drink. "I'm not talking about it tonight." I walked back to the tables. My hands were steady. I was surprised by that. What happened at dinner was something I hadn't planned and couldn't have predicted. Marcus had said nothing to me earlier about what he intended to do. He told me only that he wanted to make a toast, and I'd said of course, and left it at that because I trusted him completely, and because I was tired, and because I'd been holding things carefully for months, and I needed one evening where someone else held something. He stood up while the appetizers were being tiered. The microphone was already set up for speeches, so he simply crossed to it, buttoned his jacket, and said, "I want to say a few words." The room settled, 140 people turning toward him, the clink of glasses going quiet. Even the band, just off stage, went still. "When you love someone," he said, "you learn who they are over time. The small things first. How they take their coffee, how they act when they're tired, what they're like in the middle of a hard week." He paused. And then sometimes you get to see who they are when something really difficult happens. And you learn that too. He looked at me, just briefly. The way you look at someone when you want them to know something before the rest of the room does. Most of you know that Adrienne's family had some concerns about our wedding date. There was a shift in the room, not dramatic, just a drawing in, like curtains being pulled slightly closed. What most of you don't know is why. He clicked a small remote. The slideshow behind him changed. It was the bank document. Clean, official, dated. $54,000. Lucas LLC, investment advance. Someone at the table nearest me inhaled sharply. Adrienne's grandfather left her a trust fund, Marcus said. For a milestone moment, a wedding, a home. She didn't know where it was because her parents told her they were managing it. What they were actually doing was something different. He leapt that land. He was good at timing. He'd learned it from years of presenting to clients who didn't want to hear bad news and needed to be walked through it steadily so they couldn't look away. Months before our wedding, $54,000 from that fund was transferred to Adrienne's brother. No repayment agreement, no promissory note. He looked out at the room, and then, when we set a wedding date that interfered with her brother's travel plans, her family asked her to move the date. And when she said no, they threatened not to come. 140 people were not making any sound at all. He clicked again. The text message, white screen, dark letters. Hey, if Adrienne asks about the fun thing, just say it's still being managed. She won't push. I heard someone near the back say, "Oh my God," very softly. She didn't know, Marcus said. She trusted her family. She filed it away under someday and went back to taking care of everyone around her. He paused. I want everyone in this room to know that Adrienne did not move her wedding date. She did not beg. She did not negotiate with people who were using her own stolen money to take a vacation during her wedding week. The room was a kind of quiet that has texture to it. She sat at our kitchen table, he said, when I showed her the transfer, and she was completely still, not because she wasn't hurt, because she didn't know yet that she was allowed to be hurt out loud. I felt it then. The thing I'd been holding since February, since long before February, honestly, since I was maybe 17 and realized that my family loved me in a way that required a certain amount of disappearing. I felt it start to come apart. Not violently. More like a knot that had been tied so long it had become load-bearing and someone had finally found the loose end. She doesn't have to be quiet anymore, Marcus said, and for the record, neither do I. He put the microphone down. The applause started slowly from somewhere in the middle of the room and then spread like the room had made a collective decision. My maid of honor reached over and grabbed my hand. Someone in the back was standing, then more people, then nearly all of them. I pressed my fingertips to my mouth. My eyes were blurring. I was embarrassed about that for approximately 1 second, and then I let it happen because I was 32 years old and my husband had just stood up in front of everyone who mattered and said plainly and without apology, "Here is what happened and here is who she is." And I had never in my life had someone do that for me. My parents left before dessert. I heard from a cousin that my mother had cried in the parking lot. My father had been very quiet, driving home. Luca didn't respond to the demand letter for 11 days. His lawyer sent back a counter that my lawyer described professionally as not serious. Recounted. Day counted. 6 weeks after our wedding, sitting at the same kitchen table where Marcus had first asked me, "Do you know what happened to your grandfather's fund?" we received a wire transfer for the full $54,000. No apology, no explanation, just a number and a date and an account it came from. I stared at the confirmation for a long time. Marcus made coffee. He put a mug in front of me and sat down, and for a while we just stayed there like that, two people in a kitchen at 9 in the morning with a number on a screen that represented something more than money. "That's Grandpa Waltz," I finally said. "Yeah," he said. "It is now." The restitution changed something practical, and something else I don't have a clean word for. My mother called once a few weeks later. She said we'd handled things in a hurtful way, that the speech had embarrassed the family, that she hoped one day I'd understand why public confrontations weren't the answer. I listened until she was done. Then I said, "Mom, I hope things are okay." And I meant it. And I hung up. My father hasn't called. Lucas sent me a text in November that said, "Merry Early Christmas," followed by a Santa emoji. I stared at it for a while and then put my phone down and went back to what I was doing. Some people ask if I regret any of it. The lawyer, the demand letter, the speech. I think they're asking if I regret the cost, the silence where my parents used to be, the family group chat I'm no longer part of, the particular grief of losing something you only half had to begin with. The honest answer is that I don't think I lost anything I actually possessed. I lost the story I'd been telling myself about who they were, and that story had been costing me something too. Grandpa Walt saved his whole life. He wore the same 3 work shirts on rotation and drove a truck with 200,000 miles on it and ate lunch from a thermos every day for 30 years. And he looked at me, his granddaughter, and thought, she should have something that's just hers for when she needs it. That's not a small thing. That's a person deciding you're worth something when you're not sure of it yourself. I used part of the money for the honeymoon we'd originally said we couldn't afford. Marcus and I spent 8 days in Portugal. Narrow streets, salt air, late dinners, the kind of slow that doesn't feel possible in regular life. I sat on a terrace on the 4th night and watched the Atlantic go dark at the edges and thought about Grandpa Walt drinking his thermos coffee and saving $54,000 a few dollars at a time. And I thought, I hear you, I got there, I'm not quiet anymore. That's the thing no one tells you about the families that teach you to shrink. They tell you that small is safe, that silence is gratitude, that asking for what's yours is the same as being ungrateful. But shrinking doesn't protect you, it just makes you easier to take from. And the moment someone stands up and says, "Here is what happened," out loud in front of everyone, that moment costs something. But what it buys is the rest of your life on different terms. I'm still a physical therapist in Raleigh. I still make lists and build systems and show up. I still come home and sometimes make dinner from scratch on a weeknight because I like it, because the kitchen is mine, because the life in it is mine. I just don't file things under someday anymore. I keep thinking about the thermos. Grandpa Walt packed the same lunch every day for 30 years. He didn't take vacations. He drove a truck with rust on the wheel wells and wore the same 3 shirts until they thinned at the elbows. And somewhere in all of that quiet, unglamorous living, he saved enough to say, "Here, Adrienne, this is for you, for when you need it." That's a moral act. Not in a religious sense, just in the plainest human sense. He decided that someone else mattered enough to sacrifice for. That's the whole of it. What my parents and my brother decided, on the other hand, was that what I didn't know couldn't hurt them. That silence was the same as permission. That I was the kind of person who would file things under someday and never look too closely. They weren't wrong. I had been that person. I'd been trained into it so thoroughly I didn't recognize it as training. I thought it was just my personality. Easygoing, accommodating, grounded. But there's a difference between being grounded and being buried. What changed everything wasn't the money. It was Marcus sitting across from me at the kitchen table and asking a question I hadn't thought to ask myself. "Do you have anything in writing?" That question was an act of intelligence, not genius, just the disciplined kind. The kind that says, I will not accept a story just because it's been told to me confidently. I will look at the actual documents. I will follow the numbers where they go. That's what I hadn't been doing. I've been accepting the narrative because questioning it felt dangerous. Because in my family, asking for proof was the same as accusing someone, and accusing someone was the same as being ungrateful. And being ungrateful was the worst thing you could be. So I'd stayed grateful. I'd stayed quiet. And it had cost me $54,000 and most of my adult life believing I was too sensitive when I noticed something was wrong. The hardest part wasn't the demand letter. It wasn't even Marcus putting those documents on a screen in front of 140 people. The hardest part was deciding at 32 years old that I was allowed to want something back, that I was allowed to say that was mine without apologizing for the inconvenience of saying so. That took something I hadn't known I was building. Years of showing up to work on hard days, years of sitting with patients who were learning to use a shoulder that had stopped cooperating and saying, I know it hurts, but we keep going. You build that kind of endurance quietly, without knowing you're building it, and then one day you need it for something that isn't a patient, and it turns out it's there. My grandfather saved money in a thermos and t-shirts kind of life so that I could have something. My husband asked the questions I hadn't let myself ask. And I, finally, at 32, decided that what was mine was worth recovering. Those three things working together: the original act of care, the willingness to look clearly at what was true, and the decision not to stop when it got uncomfortable. That's what the restitution wire transfer actually represented. Not just $54,000, a full accounting. I don't think what happened to my family is unusual. I think a lot of people grow up in houses where one person's needs are treated as optional, and they learn to treat their own needs that way too. And then something cracks it open: a wedding, a document, a husband who notices a number is off, and they have to decide whether to keep accommodating or to stand up straight. I stood up. It cost me something, and I do it again without hesitating.